Had the minds behind galaxies far, far away had a more concrete plan from the get-go? Spider filmmakers not been made to squeeze an excessive amount of baddies into the finished product? Or the folks creating the next chunk of action from a beloved sci-fi franchise not decided to kill off adored characters? Who knows whether these movie series would have failed in the way they ultimately did. One thing is for certain, however, and it's that each of these errors eventually spelled doom for some of the most awesome movie franchises in cinema history. This is Whatculture, and here are costly mistakes that doomed great film and TV franchises, not sticking to one vision: Star Wars. After a set of prequel flicks had largely divided the Star Wars fanbase, it came as a pleasant surprise to find just about every lover of the galaxy far, far away walking out of the first Skywalker Saga episode in 10 years with a smile on their face. People who wanted to see more jaw-dropping visuals, lightsabers clash in epic duels, and invest in a bunch of brand new heroes and villains fighting over the fate of this galaxy were given precisely that in Episode 7, The Force Awakens, and others who just wanted something that felt like the heartwarming Star Wars they'd been raised on back before midichlorians and politics began infecting the franchise got what they were looking for too. But then things started to get a little bit unfocused. While Rian Johnson's Episode 8, The Last Jedi, was certainly a bold departure from what came before it, stuff like its laughing off of the identity of Rey's parents and the idea of Snoke being the trilogy's major threat definitely rubbed some folks up the wrong way. And the decision to hand the story back to J.J. Abrams after Colin Trevorrow's exit from Episode 9, one that led to the director pretty much undoing everything Johnson had dared to explore in Episode 8, only highlighted how foolish it was of Disney/Lucasfilm to not head into this huge challenge without a general beginning, middle, and end plan for their directors to stick to. The inconsistent sequels will forever sit as a reminder of what not to do for Lucasfilm going forward.
Difficult second season that shouldn't have happened. 13 Reasons Why. 13 Reasons Why's first season had the world talking due to its intense subject matter, but it's hard to deny that it was a compelling adaptation of Jay Asher's novel, highlighting the life and death of Hannah Baker. However, instead of letting the initial season linger in people's minds, Netflix decided that its popularity was enough cause for renewal. Without any source material to go on, or, even its central character, 13 Reasons Why quickly descended into a tropey, misguided attempt to rehash a story it already told. And while its third season was a massive improvement over that messy second, the powers that be completely lost sight of what the show once was. Again, here we have another case of when the series' popularity outweighs the logic of whether it should go on or not.
Not having a strong idea for Men in Black International, Men in Black. On paper, the idea of throwing the deeply likable Tessa Thompson and Chris Hemsworth into a brand new Men in Black adventure, one that took our new alien helping/fighting heroes all across the globe, seemed like a somewhat decent one. But as noted by Sony's own studio boss Tom Rothman, in the wake of the fourth MIB flick's disappointing performance both critically and commercially, it likely just wasn't strong enough. Put simply, the series has never quite been able to fully recapture the quirky charm created during that first 1997 ride. Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones' marvelous chemistry is unrivaled, even by the compelling MCU stars of International, and the folks looking to squeeze every last penny out of the well-known IP are more obsessed with just getting the black suits, neuralizers, and various alien celebrity cameos on screen than thinking of a compelling reason for any of the above to actually, be there. Rothman would note back when International was still in cinemas that he'd be surprised if this was the franchise's last movie. So if Sony do decide to move forward with yet another MIB tale, fingers crossed they wipe the minds of their audience in the opening few minutes and deliver a story that really justifies a fifth bite of the apple.
The terrible Negan cliffhanger, The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead had so much going for it by the time that it reached season 6, because it had successfully managed to introduce comic book threat Negan as an antagonist without even having him appear on screen. Yep, the plotting was that good that they built up this guy's fearful reputation for a whole season, leaving new fans intrigued and comic book fans salivating at the thought of his arrival. And then they went and let all that intricately plotted air out in a series of frustrating decisions. Negan's arrival in the finale resulted in the cheapest cliffhanger in TV history. as he bashed in the head of, well, the cameraman apparently. Unsure of who they were going to kill off, the powers that be thought it best to keep viewers waiting. Again, and never revealed who the villain targeted until the 7th season's premiere. To top it all off, this kickstarted a trend as the writers promised this great war that never came throughout the 7th season and fizzled out in the 8th. All while Negan quickly developed into a pantomime villain that wasted time with endless monologues and found himself protected by a ton of plot armor. And even though the show eventually improved, it didn't matter because people had stopped caring.
Too much studio interference / pressure, Spider-Man. Alongside the outstanding first few X-Men flicks, oh we will get there, Sam Raimi's own Spider-Verse was one of the first to really capture the comic book spirit of a beloved superhero and successfully swing such an icon onto the big screen. Those first 2 Spidey outings for Tobey Maguire and co were oozing with heart, contained the occasional moment of enjoyable silliness, and also found the time to really nail some of the more emotional beats required of a Peter Parker story. They also largely just focused on the one member of Spidey's legendary rogues gallery, something the 3rd installment in the series sadly most certainly did not. And it was that call to try and juggle way too many webhead antagonists in that disappointing 2007 threequel, with Raimi eventually being pressured to include fan favourite Venom by producer Avi Arad after his initial plan to briefly introduce Vulture in the film was dropped. That ultimately resulted in an entirely muddled and overstuffed feature. In the wake of that franchise low point, a planned 4th entry was then scrapped on the back of Raimi feeling he was in danger of producing yet another underwhelming Spider movie, after failing to nail the story before Sony's deadline, as the studio then pushed ahead with an amazing reboot instead. Oh, and just a quick one, thank you very much for watching this video today, and if you like what you see, then go and click on that subscribe button right down below and get more What Culture goodness sent straight to your eyes.
Not moving on from the original cast, Glee. For its first 3 glorious years, Glee centered on Mr. Will Schuester and his McKinley High Glee Club, New Directions, as they attempted to fight the bias against the arts by winning their sectionals, regionals, and nationals championships. However, when the time came for those original characters to graduate, fans wondered what would happen to the show. Too afraid to let go and yet too scared to alienate fans, the show adopted a split narrative format, devoting half of its time to the beloved graduates as they chase their dreams in New York City, and the other half to the next generation of New Directions back at McKinley. And it didn't take long to see that it just wasn't working. The maturity of the New York storyline didn't balance well with the immaturity of the McKinley ones, and the new characters were little more than cardboard copies of the originals, forced to repeat earlier storylines without any of the stakes. And this in turn marked the beginning of the end for this once revolutionary show.
Trying to replay the hits, X-Men. There were still the odd The Last Stand and Origins Wolverine hiccups here and there of course, but for the most part, the X-Men flicks had consistently delivered fresh, engaging, bold and exciting tales involving a whole host of captivating 3-dimensional superfigures. But in the wake of the stellar clash of generations that was Days of Future Past, Fox appeared to simply run out of thrilling ideas for the students of Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, replaying the hits and arcs throughout both Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix, everything from Quicksilver's less impressive slow-motion sequence sequel, to the need to pointlessly shoehorn Hugh Jackman's Wolverine into the action, to delivering yet another lackluster version of the iconic Dark Phoenix storyline, all pointed to a franchise that had peaked during that aforementioned time-traveling epic. Sure, the likes of Logan and Deadpool offered some hope away from Charles and his team clashing with Thanos-like super mutants and Phoenix forces, but it was clear that an MCU mutant reboot/refresh of sorts was needed by the time the latest uninspiring Fox X chapter stumbled out of theaters in 2019.
Not sticking with the original plan, Heroes. Heroes was, without question, one of the most innovative, compelling, and edge-of-seat shows to ever grace television. The only problem is that this 4-season show was only all of that in its first. Though the show was originally envisioned as a multi-season show, it was designed to tell different stories. That's right, creator Tim Kring had planned on repopulating it with a brand new cast for the 2nd season. But following the popularity of the show and that specific cast, plans were ultimately changed, meaning that this 1-season story had to be redesigned. As a result, all the momentum that the show had amassed was quickly killed off, and fans grew weary of the fact that they were flogging their dead heroes in a bid to keep this diluted story going. Heroes probably could have enjoyed a longer run had the powers that be followed the initial plan. It might not have been as high a standard as that first season, but it would have given the show a chance, which is more than those last 3 seasons gave it.
Killing off beloved characters, Alien. Honestly, what did Fox have against fans of this face-hugging franchise, eh? The minute viewers found themselves growing attached to one of the various badass, compelling, or charismatic figures seen battling against various xenomorphs in the galaxy, the studio and filmmakers behind a number of the increasingly infuriating follow-ups to Aliens opted to murder them, most of the time off-screen. After becoming 2 of the most celebrated members of the team fighting through the acid-dribbling aliens in James Cameron's first Alien sequel, Hicks and Newt were unceremoniously killed off in David Fincher's Alien 3, with that core being one of the main reasons fans were left feeling let down by the threequel. Having to then witness Ellen Ripley, the iconic hero of the franchise, fall to her death after learning she was carrying an alien queen embryo only added to the suffering. This directly fed into the baffling call to have Ripley then return as a human xenomorph clone in the flop that was Jean-Pierre Jeunet's Alien Resurrection. And after all of that, the man who started this whole thing, Ridley Scott, then decided to come along and repeat those same franchise-wrecking mistakes when it came time to follow up his fascinating Prometheus movie, murdering that film's compelling lead Elizabeth Shaw off-screen in the time between that flick and Alien Covenant. Sure enough, fans once again despised having to watch another beloved character bite the dust too soon, and Covenant became yet another divisive underperformer at the box office for the franchise.
Turning it into a main show clone, Fear the Walking Dead. When Fear the Walking Dead debuted on screens, it was quickly dismissed by those who didn't take to its domestic setup prior to the apocalypse's beginnings. Then when its parent show began to decline, it suddenly ignited, exploding onto screens with a 3rd season that has gone down in history as one of the best in the entire Walking Dead universe. Unfortunately, Walking Dead showrunner Scott Gimple then came on board and thought it would be a good idea to make it more like its now flailing parent show. Time jumps moved Fear further away from its own identity as Gimple attempted to reboot it, and to top it all off, Walking Dead personality Vacuum Morgan was shoehorned into the spin-off as a main character, while Fear's 2 most interesting were quickly disposed of. A show originally intended as a look at the beginning of the zombie apocalypse through familial eyes was quickly turned into a half-baked Walking Dead wannabe.
Taking things up way too many notches, the Fast series. For a time there, the likes of Dominic Toretto and his Corona-sipping crew throwing vaults around Brazil and fighting off tanks on highways was a genuine riot, with the series successfully transitioning from cult hit street racing franchise into a genuine box office action juggernaut. But the Fast movies' need to constantly up the ante and push the limits within this universe have led to the flicks becoming increasingly silly. Even before Fast 10 failed to bring in the sort of money Universal were likely hoping for after chucking $340 million at the 10th main entry into the franchise, the series had already completely jumped the shark with everything from vehicles jumping across skyscrapers to cars blasting off into space. It just seems as though audiences are now finally reaching their Vin Diesel growling before he does something even Ethan Hunt would class as hilariously impossible limit, driving a muscle car down the face of a dam this past year, and are likely welcoming this dumb ride finally coming to an end in the next few years.
Losing sight of its origin, Prison Break. You'd think a show called Prison Break would have figured out that all it had to do was exactly what it said on the tin. The show's first season is considered one of the all-time great seasons of television ever made, and rightly so, as Michael Scofield's intricate plot to rescue his innocent brother Lincoln Burrows from prison kept us glued to our screens for the whole year. It's true that the show accomplished everything it set out to do in that first year, but the fact of the matter is that it wasn't built to last, and it's unfortunate that Fox never realised that. The second season began documenting their lives on the run, with each episode making its title less and less relevant. And as the show went on, one or both brothers hopped in and out of different prisons in a desperate attempt to make that title mean something once more, but it simply wasn't meant to be. Unfortunately, like we've seen many times before, its popularity was ultimately its downfall.
Pumping out too much content, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. A world where Marvel Studios were ever in a position where fans weren't lining up outside of theaters to take in their next gripping phase entry once seemed unthinkable. Here was a franchise that had somehow forced folks all over the planet to invest in a number of largely overlooked figures within the superhero sphere, and patiently spent a decade or so successfully building anticipation for the must-see conclusion of the Infinity Saga. But rather than give their fanbase a moment to breathe after watching Thanos finally get dusted away, Kevin Feige and co had other ideas. And those ideas involved pumping out a seemingly constant stream of content, not just on the big screen but on Disney Plus now too. What followed was an absolute deluge of new characters and stories folks struggled to really connect with, and often dodgy visual effects, due to Marvel overworking their talented VFX artists, and it's now got to the point where those who once did whatever it took to keep up with all things Marvel Cinematic Universe would rather spend their precious time elsewhere. The Marvels becoming the lowest grossing MCU movie of all time recently is simply the latest reminder of how much Marvel Studios have worn out their audience with their relentless waves of incoming content. Maybe it's time to take a breather, yeah?